Okay, I'm not sure if you guys heard Jeremy a second ago, but we are live on YouTube now. We're sending the link over to Facebook. So here in just a moment, you can go ahead and get started. And we might have a few attendees trickling in throughout because they're getting some late moment information, but that's what we've got.
Okay.
So stand by one moment.
All right, Sue, we're ready to start.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm Joy Hofmeister, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We are so glad to finally be streaming live and make the connection with you. I hope you've got a cup of coffee ready and you are in a mode of just really being inspired by some students today, because I'm telling you, we have got an all-star panel of students that are just going to make your day. It has been a whirlwind since March 16th, and I am so glad to be reconnecting with you. If you've been a part of EngageOK conferences in past years, you might be used to joining us in a big high school auditorium this time of year. But of course, with COVID, that has moved everything that we were planning to do on the road, moving from community to in the cloud. And we are so happy that you've joined us in this new format. We've got 30 sessions ahead through Friday, and we are confident that you are going to find professional learning opportunities well worth your time, and perhaps even more convenient for you. And that will all prepare us for a school year that we know will be like no other, none ever, and probably never like it in the future. What we are facing is incredibly serious. In addition to the uncertainties and concerns about the pandemic, we know our students have sustained learning loss beyond the typical summer slide that we all talk about. And that is due to the unprecedented ending of last school year. The only thing unknown is the degree of loss on our individual students and that individual student basis. Knowledge, as noted educator Mary McLeod Bethune said, is the prime need of the hour. Indeed it is. But against this backdrop, we face a frightening and unseen foe in COVID-19. Communities and schools may be disrupted by the virus, and additional periods of remote or distance learning or virtual online for the full semester could be a possibility this year, depending on the path of the coronavirus. As you know, the American Academy of Pediatrics has advocated for all policy considerations for the coming school year that we need to get our kids physically present in school, but we have to do it safely. It is also true that reopening school must and will be science-driven, with safety protocols that we know are based in the latest information. As we are part of a novel coronavirus, we are clinging to experts, and every precaution to protect the health and well-being of all of our student community is our paramount goal. So this includes prioritizing social distancing, good hygiene, and perhaps most importantly of all, masks for our students and staff and every member that would walk in the door of any school. Before we hear from our panelists, I want to circle back to a few additional words from Mary McLeod Bethune. The progress of the world will call for the best that all of us have to give. More than 700,000 Oklahoma public school children know they can count on your best every day and in every circumstance. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for moving heaven and earth to reconnect with your students last year, and your commitment, your empathy, and your amazing abilities to change lives. So I am excited to be able to now turn the conversation to the reason we all do what we do, students. This morning, I'm delighted to welcome several Oklahoma students, all members of my Student Advisory Council, who are here to discuss some very serious topics. We know you are eager to hear from them. So we'll focus the conversation on student voices. And if time permits, we're going to be combing through comments and questions that you might pose on Facebook Live. And let's get started here with and meet our panelists. We are joined today by these amazing students from around the state. They're going to introduce themselves as they begin speaking so that we can keep moving and get right to the conversation. Panelists, be sure to mute your mic until while you are not speaking, and you can use the raised hand feature so that we can move really swiftly with our conversation. So let's start with the obvious. Panelists, I'm curious about the impact of COVID-19 as you and your friends have experienced it. Let's get us started with what you experienced this past spring and this summer. And as you think forward, who will be first? All right, Kel, I'm calling on you.
I think it will be difficult to explain what I've gone through. I think I've been through a lot of good and bad during this time. One of the good things is, continuing to learn, doing volunteer work at the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma, or in an internship. But going into the school year, I'm observing what I'm doing at work right now and how we're social distancing. And I know there will be a lot more students in the school, so I'm kind of nervous if we were to go back, and I'm curious to see how that environment would look like.
Let's see. Who else? You can jump in.
So
and introduce yourself as well.
Oh, I'm Mariah Martin, and I'm a rising senior at Ringling High School. What I've experienced is a lot of missed opportunities, but a lot of seeing people go above and beyond and adapt to give us, the class of 2021 and the class of 2020, a lot of new opportunities and new ways to do that. And so it's been kind of sad to miss some of those opportunities, but it just really shows our classes how much people really do care for us and how much people want the youth to better themselves by making it a priority to give us those opportunities and those chances to prepare ourselves for the next step.
Thank you. And before we go on, Kel, would you introduce yourself as well? I called on you and didn't give you that chance.
Yes. My name is Shakeel Pinkston, also known as Kel Pinkston. I'm a student at Putnam City High School in the Putnam City School District, and I'll be a senior this year, class of 2021.
Awesome. What other experiences did you have with distance learning, with the change in finishing the year and this summer even?
I'll go ahead and jump in. My name's Payton Watkins. I just completed my senior year at Stillwater High School, so class of 2020. And I felt like a lot of my class, at least the senior class, experienced a lot of loss throughout this because as you go through grade school and up into secondary school, you spend the entire time looking forward to this period of your education because it's what you've worked for the whole time, and you experience a lot of grief over what you missed or what you could have had. So I'd say that's the biggest thing that we battled, at least for my grade level. And as far as distance learning, I felt like we had a lot of technological problems. We had to learn how to adapt together to that because none of us had really used it that way before. So that would be what I would say.
I'll go ahead and jump in too, if that's all right.
Yeah.
My name's Jake Lambeth, and I'm from Guyman High School up in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. And I've experienced quite a bit of loss through the distance learning. Our school district recently gave out Chromebooks to all the students in high school. And although we have Chromebooks, a lot of the students in our school district don't have access to Wi-Fi. And when public facilities shut down, there was no way for them to gain access to Wi-Fi. So although there is that distance learning option available, Wi-Fi presents a huge problem. And I don't think that, I think school should open up. It should be up to the student to decide whether he or she should be able to go to school. And I think the state should provide, at least provide that opportunity for the students.
I agree with you, Jake. I'm Madison Stevens. I'm from Weatherford, and I have just graduated high school. One thing that I noticed throughout the shutdown of schools this past year was that there was a large decrease in the value of learning throughout the year and the value of the material that was being brought out and how helpful it was. I go to a top 10 school, and normally our academic material is very rigorous and our students do very well. But even some of my most intense teachers who teach very well and teach honors classes were at a loss of what to do during all of the technology problems that we had. And I think that there are public schools like Epic who are good at what they do already, and that some teachers are not prepared to do technology and they're much better in person. And I think that in person is better in any situation.
Yeah, thank you for that too. Sean.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Keene, and I will be a rising senior this year at Charles Page High School in Sand Springs. So myself and my friends, we obviously experienced a lot of cancellation, whether that be through things like your advisory council, Dr. Hofmeister, or sporting events. So we definitely saw a lot of loss, but we also saw, at least our school district, we were able to adapt pretty quickly. So coming off of spring break, it was a few days, about a week or so after that, and then we were starting to get back on track as far as preparing for AP tests and things of that nature. So my district at least was able to make sure that we stayed on track with our academics. Obviously, like Madison, like you said, it may not quite have been what we were used to in the classroom, but they made sure that we were at least on track. And then outside of school, definitely seen a lot of adaptation. I've been able to participate in some online events, and it's been really neat to see the opportunities that are available to us even as we navigate this online world. So I've been able to participate in a leadership camp. I've had some friends that have been able to do some online learning sessions to make sure that we're still staying involved and staying challenged throughout the summer.
So Sean, what you mentioned different ways that was done. What worked? What was effective for you in that connecting?
What really, as far as in regards to school, our administration was super open with us about what the expectation was going to be moving forward. And a lot of my teachers, and especially my counseling staff, were very open, and the communication was there. Because I think that's one of the areas where everybody was having trouble, because especially on the administration side, they were getting questions from all over the place, from teachers, from parents, from the students. But even throughout that and throughout the volume of messages that they were getting, if I had a question regarding, what the AP test was going to look like for my physics teacher, that I was able to get a really quick response, which helped. Obviously, it's not going to replicate that classroom experience of having the teacher there to assist me, but it was at least able to still gain something from that and still have them as a resource.
That's helpful. Thank you. Kayden.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kayden Brooks. I'm an EPIC charter student, and I'll be a senior this year. So not much has changed for me when it comes to the educational side of things, because all my school is online. So I would say mostly because my summer's been affected with, family reunions and church camps and all that. But I definitely feel for my fellow students that are in brick and mortar schools because, transitioning from brick and mortar school to an all online school or schooling is hard. I went through it. And it's definitely, it's hard at the beginning, but, overall, you'll get used to it. I mean, maybe not, but yeah, it's definitely hard. And I feel for everybody who's had to do that.
That's a really interesting point that you've experienced even before COVID, that transition to all virtual. So thank you, Kayden. Nick.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Sayeg, and I graduated from Western Heights High School this past year. And I kind of have the same story that Kayden has, as I was a virtual concurrent student at Oklahoma State University here in Oklahoma City. And so nothing really much changed for me regarding my academics, but what I witnessed was I had a lot of optimism about how school districts were handling the younger students and providing that hope for them, because obviously a kindergartner wouldn't really understand what's going on in these unprecedented times. And also those social services and the meals they provided for students was excellent, because a lot of the students in low socioeconomic backgrounds really rely on the school district for their free and reduced lunch programs. And I think that going forward, as we enter the 2020-2021 school year, that providing these necessary social programs and obviously food programs would be very beneficial for lots of Oklahomans in public schools.
Thank you. I'm very curious, how you felt just experiencing this. And I know, Payton, you've got a comment, but I'm also interested in that, if you can share as well, but please go ahead.
Absolutely. That actually kind of ties into what I was going to say. So in our last meeting with our bigger council, I kind of talked about how a lot of us felt a loss of control. Whenever you're a student, especially in today's day and age, you get a lot of choices. Choose what classes you take, how you execute certain things. Things are really up to you for the most part. And whenever we switched to distance learning, we kind of lost that. And my district put forth an effort to give us some control by allowing seniors to make some choices, which was really helpful. But I think that way that we could incorporate that into the future would be having a more open line of communication between administrators and students when making policies. A lot of times they forget to consult us. And as Mrs. Hofmeister said at one point, I remember she said that who better knows what students need than students. So maybe sending out surveys, talking to your students before you make policies and letting that weigh in a little bit so that you can get the best idea of what is beneficial for both the school and the students and get that exchange of ideas.
That's really great. Thank you for just sharing practically and as well how your feelings were impacted by those things we did or didn't do. Appreciate that. Kel?
Yes, kind of just to backtrack a little bit, my bad about that. One of the other issues that I did see is with distance learning, the fact that it doesn't allow us to learn a few more of the essential things that we need that are not implemented in our curriculum, like how to work in different classroom environments. And if you're anything like me, you need to be around people, and you also love to be around people. And that's kind of how I operate on a daily basis.
Yeah, you're bringing up that total impact of the school experience with peers, with even sometimes just different leadership and instructional styles of teachers that you have to kind of navigate. I appreciate that. Mariah.
So I didn't experience this personally, but in talking to some of my counselors and teachers, what they were really concerned with was kids that don't have a very good home life that come to school as an escape, or come to school, they need that school interaction for their mental health, not just their education. And so that was a problem that we saw a lot in our school district, was just the disconnect with the teachers and the counselors, and not being able to have access to that in-person communication. I know I spoke to my counselor, and she said that some of the kids came back and they just weren't themselves. They weren't who she saw, because they're missing that interaction and that care, and just that interaction of being at school and knowing somebody cares and knowing somebody's trying to push you to be better, because they don't always have that at home when they go back. So that was a big concern that we saw with how people felt in my district.
And you're bringing up that important mental health aspect too. So very, Zeeler. I see Zeeler. Yes.
Hello, good morning. Yeah, my name is Zeeler Chow. I'm a graduating senior from Norman North High School. Really quickly, before I say something more, I want to give a big shout out to all the teachers who have adapted so well to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially my teachers. I know they worked really hard. For example, my English teacher personally drove around and mailed us our graded essays back to us during the pandemic. And my debate teacher made several 20-minute long videos and posted them up on YouTube as sort of a lecture and a more engaging activity for us to see. They put in a lot of work, but sometimes during COVID, backing off what Mariah said, we do experience a lot of mental illnesses and mental health, depression and stress among these times. So a lot of these things that when teachers post assignments on Google Classroom or post video lectures for us to see, it might not work the best, and students might not have the they might not have the drive to go view those. What I did find that worked, however, was when teachers hosted some Google Hangouts or Zoom meetings, and when we had a more engaging class lecture and discussion, when students got to just talk and have a conversation with their classmates, have a conversation with their teacher, not necessarily about the school subject, but also learning some more. I felt like that was what worked the most. And yeah, so I just really wanted to give that point out there.
Really, really, that's very practical. I think that's really helpful as we continue answering questions. So Jake and Perla, think about what you saw that really worked or a concern you have. Yeah.
I have something to add to what you're saying there, Mr. or Miss Hofmeister. When you said what worked, I only had one teacher that I took a class from that did an online learning, and that was U.S. government. I'm a graduated senior from Guyman. I forgot to mention that. And he would post he would assign videos, and he would post those videos in a video that he would upload to the class, to Google Classroom. And so that way, if you couldn't, if you didn't have access to YouTube, but you had access to Google Classroom, you could watch the video through Google Classroom. Since our school district doesn't really have a lot of Wi-Fi access, I think maybe something that just came to my mind was maybe mailing the school assignments via physical mail, and maybe that could help. And if we could work something out with the state mailing department, or I don't know if there's a way we could work that out or not.
Thank you. I mean, these are really helpful and practical considerations. And when you think about, a lot of you are talking about the high school experience and being able to put things on YouTube. You may have siblings or know of those younger students as well. And be sure feel free. You do not have to speak only to your experience. But if you have an understanding of what that's like as well in some of our younger grade levels. I think that's helpful too. And then Perla, as we're kind of thinking about looking forward to the next year, and as the last semester wrapped up, what concerns you, Perla, as you kind of lessons learned or how we could improve on that?
Yeah, my name is Perla Tovar. Good morning, everyone. I just graduated from Keene High School, and one of my main concerns is I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and during the pandemic, I got to join them while they video chat their classmates and all that good stuff. Which my brother is in kindergarten, and it just opened our eyes to see how important school is. And they don't get to interact with these kids. They don't get to like grow and learn with them. And it was different. And I don't know, like I can't imagine myself not going through my younger ages of learning in school. And I don't know how much longer this pandemic is gonna last, but they're very much missing out on a lot of opportunities, and they would do anything to be back with their classmates. So yeah, I'm like just really concerned about that. My other sibling, she's in junior high, and she's just looking forward to playing sports again. And all of this right now, we don't know how it's going to look in the future. So. I believe you're still on mute.
I was muted. Sorry about that. Okay. So as, you know, let's go ahead and flip to that next slide. Several of you graduated this spring. So how did the disruption of the end of the school year change things for you in terms of graduation or your plans after graduation? And we won't spend too much time on this because we've got some other things I want to be sure to get to. Maybe just two.
I'll just jump on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I actually just graduated this past weekend, but on our actual graduation day, I actually planned a parade graduation, and it was super cool. They want to make it a tradition now, and we had all our teachers lined up and friends and family. It was really nice. But the pandemic, we didn't get to have like our senior trip, our senior walk, and a lot of things we had to miss out on. But I will say that this pandemic has definitely made our class stronger. And I know my school tried to do whatever they could, but we just really didn't have a control on anything with this pandemic. So.
And you got creative. It sounds like was it helpful? Like, did your school say, let's get the students involved in doing this? Did that make a difference? Or did others have experiences where you just heard news and decisions were made?
It was all student-led, really. Our school was kind of scared to do things because they were going to have to all online and all these different but I think all the kids were definitely down, knowing that these were the last memories they were going to have with their classmates that they've been in school for the past 4 years. So.
Thank you. Payton?
Yes, so I'm kind of going to bring up the whole communication thing again, because I felt like that was something my school was actually lacking in this time around. Usually they're really great about it, but I was very disappointed in the way our school board handled things for our graduation. It still hasn't happened yet. It's supposed to happen July 24th, but as far as the planning and decision making, I felt like they didn't really take any consideration into what the students wanted. As far as we had a venue that would fit many more of our family members, they went with a smaller venue because we don't know why. Many of us communicated with them, tried to email them, and that line of communication wasn't great. That being said, there were certainly people advocating for the students' best interests, but didn't work out that way. So I think communication is really a big thing. Communicating with the students on what they want for something as big as commencement that's already kind of being taken over by the pandemic and being changed. Communication is a really big aspect for that.
That's a great reminder for all of us. Madison, is that your experience? Do you share that?
Actually, my school in Weatherford found out a great way to have graduation in June, and we had it out on the football field. And if people were not comfortable, they could stay in the stands, they could bring their lawn chairs and just sit with their own group of people. And we still had the opportunity to give our speeches, and it all worked out very well. And the weather was great. So I think if everyone really tries hard enough, we can figure out ways to make things meaningful, because it's that in-person meaningful experience that is important for those first and last kind of events that you have going through high school. And I was very appreciative to my school district for making an effort to do that in person.
Excellent. Thank you. That's really good feedback. Nick.
Yeah, so my district kind of did like a hybrid online in-person type thing back in April. Everything was very socially distant. I felt very safe, and I'm sure many of the other students did as well. But I think that the transition between high school and post-secondary education is where I think there's a bigger gap there than us just missing out on a commencement ceremony, which I'm sure I can speak for the entire class of 2020 that, yeah, we all wanted to do it, but I think that these school districts putting in different ways, whether it be virtual or in person now when it's a little bit later into the pandemic, I think that's great for the students. But like some of the other students have said, communication was a real big issue, I think, for my district, just because not necessarily that they weren't communicating that they did know something, but I mean, this is obviously times we've never seen before, so nobody really knows anything, and plans can change the next day depending on what research says and what science has come back to us from the state. But going on to post-secondary education, for me, I've had to do all my orientation online, virtual, which I'm sure many of other students will have to do the same as well. And as a first-generation student, it's really going to be a bigger leap into post-secondary education, as I've never experienced anything like it. And I'm sure many other first-generation students have it as well.
That's a very interesting point. It is a transition to another step that is also done differently than even anyone's done before. So, thanks for pointing that out as well. Kel, I think you wrote some things in the chat that I think would be really important for people to hear you say in case they can't see our chat. And they may not be able to if they're following live. Just would you give your remarks some, I think specifically about your words about counselors?
Yes. So as I put in the chat, I know of 2 people who committed suicide in the past 2 years, all being students in Oklahoma schools, and one being a close relative who committed suicide last year in 2019. And one thing that I've observed is though I'm able to go to my school counselors in times of need, they're not always available, and I'm not always able to have a long conversation with them, because they're more likely to counsel our academic needs. There's a lot of other things like getting testing ready that they have to put before us. So I would really like to see school psychologists more known in our public school systems.
You're bringing up a point that we do recognize is just really lacking, and we need to have more counselors, licensed professional counselors in our schools, as well as academic counselors. I mean, of course, that's a very important component that the Office of Counseling contributes and gives to students. What do you think about this effort that I'm working on with DHS? They have a goal, and we're really working together to have school-based social workers, so that there are those connections to that support safety network and getting those resources, but also coming alongside our school counselors as well and being embedded in the school. What do you think of that?
I think that would be something great to be implemented into our school systems. And I say it because a lot of the times we as students have to help counsel our friends, and we rely on each other to help with our everyday needs. And I know I also had a friend who attempted to this school year, and he went to like 2 counselors because, you know, they both ran out of time. And then he also went to our resource officer and then one of our principals, and then it still didn't satisfy his needs. And he had to end up going to the hospital this year. So I think that that would be very good. And I think it would be very beneficial to our schools.
Well, and you speak for many when you describe that, because we know that based on the needs assessment that is done by the mental health office, we have seen the moderate to severe depression in our state go as high among students 6th through 12th grade as 81%. And it has, the last time that we have results on our testing was for 2017. And those results showed that it had dropped to 75%, but still 75% of our 6th through 12th graders are suffering from depression. And there are many reasons for that. But I do worry about this with that disconnect that we have with social distancing, the isolation. So it is, what do you think of that? Nicholas, what's on your mind, Nick?
Yeah, I think Shakeel brings up a great point, but especially as we enter this virtual world, I think it's going to get even worse because, you know, students are isolated and they may not have great family lives because a lot of students, I've personally seen in my district, use their school and their friends and their teachers as a way to escape that at-home life that may not be so comfortable. And I think that going forward, and even after post-pandemic, once we're all returning to in-school classes like we usually are, specifically for my district, you know, I feel like there's a lack of obviously social workers, but there's an excess of security and police officers just policing students, and obviously they need to be present to resolve issues. But what I'm more concerned about is stopping those problems before they originate, like getting these social workers in elementary schools and teaching students like the morals and respect and values they're supposed to have as they go through education, instead of just forcing that on high school students who have been used to acting however they want for the rest, or for as thus far going through primary and secondary education. And I think that we have to think about the lives outside of the classroom for some of these students, which is could be very good, but could also be very negative for the students.
Right. And I know, Mariah, you've got your hand raised as well. And I want to hear that. And as we kind of, we're really shifting to that next question in this conversation where, you know, you were affected by the statewide move to distance learning that ended the school year last year. So, you know, let's continue to think about this. How did it impact your peers? And what do you suggest that schools and teachers do in the coming year with that in mind? Mariah, can you speak to any of that?
So I actually have the awesome opportunity to work at my school's after school program for our elementary kids. And a lot of the kids that you see come there are those kids that don't come from such good homes. And, you know, that's really, you know, you worry about high school students having that disconnect. Yeah. But like Kel said, you know, we can kind of, you know, it's not always sufficient, but we can kind of rely on each other, and we have cell phones and, you know, like ways to get in touch. But those elementary kids are kind of going home to isolation with just, you know, their parents, and hopefully, you know, they have siblings or parents or someone that they're around that they can talk to, but a lot of them really don't. And one thing that we did, we usually have a summer program for the kids that go to the after school program. They can come to the summer program, you know, they can get their food and have the in-person connection throughout the summer, but we didn't get to have that this year. But one thing we did, and I thought it was a really good idea, is we had a virtual summer program. And so we kind of had a two-way approach to it. So I know they handed out packets and supplies and stuff, and they gave it to all the kids that were going to participate throughout the summer. And then every day, myself and a few others would post, you know, science videos, PE videos, interactive videos. So it was virtual, but they also had that in-person component of, they had, you know, something like textual that they could use with the video. So it wasn't just a virtual deal, it was still kind of interactive. And I thought that was a really good way to keep elementary students engaged, because the virtual thing isn't always the greatest for them.
So we've got to be flexible. We've got to adapt. Sounds like you're saying as well. Then, and we have to be really creative in doing that. So, let's kind of really shift to something just as weighty. We've talked about the spring, and now, here we are in the summer, and we have all watched as our nation has grappled with reckoning on the painful legacy of systemic racism. I'm curious how you think racial and ethnic identity and systematic racism affect the student experience, and what should schools do differently?
Can I jump in on this?
Yes.
Okay, so I come from a school where white people are a minority. I'm half white and half Asian Indian. And so I've got a very objective standpoint on this as far as my own race goes. I think that, we have a large Hispanic population in our town because we have a food processing plant, and a lot of families work there, and that
right. You're in Woodward, right?
Guyman.
Guyman. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. And really, our school doesn't. I don't see our school struggling with racism a whole lot. I mean, a lot of the students kind of find a brotherhood and sisterhood in their own classrooms, and so they pat on each other's back, and there's a very family oriented environment in my school. And I think if we focus on racism too much, we could make that. I think we need to be aware of it, but I don't think we should force it down students' throats, because if we do that, we're going to indoctrinate them. We need to teach them how to think for themselves. I've had some excellent teachers do that for me. And I think the best way to do that is to ask students questions that provoke them to think. And critical thinking is vital to students, and it's a super valuable resource as you go into the world and navigate around decisions. Because if you're trying to think one way, then I believe that if you're not challenged, you may not change your viewpoint. So I think I know that I read the chat on a previous meeting we've had as a student advisory council, and there have been voices say that we should teach or have a state core in racism. And I don't know how long that would last, but I think maybe it would be that would provide a grounds for indoctrination. So I'll step up.
It's really helpful too, just hearing your perspective. And so remind everyone as we go through this again, where you're located. It'll help. Mariah, you're up.
So I talked about this a little bit in our last meeting. I come from Ringling, Oklahoma, which is a small school in southern Oklahoma. And as I looked around my classroom, I saw people who looked like myself. And I saw all my classmates, they looked like me. Like, we'd never been exposed to people who believed different, who looked different. And as I went out and I started going to these places and these meetings, I met all these wonderful people who were nothing like myself. And it kind of got me thinking, so we have financial literacy, and kind of to say what Jake was saying, why don't we have communication literacy? Because I know my classmates, and I know they say things sometimes that, could be racist, but I know they have a good heart. And I know when people come into our school and they get to know them, and those people are different than themselves, they treat them just the same. But it's more so they're, that way towards people that they don't understand and that they don't know. And so if we could have a communication literacy, because that's really something we're lacking, is the ability to have the hard conversations, because we don't know how, and we don't know how to agree with someone who doesn't agree with us. And so, we have financial literacy in our classrooms. So why don't we have communication literacy to teach us to have these hard conversations so that we can, get to understand people who aren't like us and maybe not fear them so much.
So I just have to ask you, so when you were, you described you were exposed to, now you're in a new setting and there's people who don't look like you, who don't believe like you. How did you bridge that?
So I just thankfully I have teachers, and I actually was involved in this thing called Ethics Bowl, which, like Jake said, challenged me to think openly, to have an open mind. And so I always went into it with a very open mind and open perspective. If it kind of Ethics Bowl taught me that people don't have to agree with me, people don't have to believe the same way as me, and that doesn't mean they're wrong, and that doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means there's different ways to look at things, there's different perspectives, and it taught me the value of those perspectives. And yes, I believe what I believe, but there's value in what the other person believes, and I can learn from that, and I can build my beliefs off that. So coming from Ethics Bowl, which my wonderful teacher, Ms. Howard, I think she's watching this, she brought that to our school. And that's been the difference maker for me, is, being educated and having those hard conversations, and being able to have an open mind because of what I've been taught. So that's why I think communication literacy would be a really, really effective way to do that.
Thanks, Mariah. Nick.
So I come from kind of the same background as Jake. I went to Western Heights High School here in Oklahoma City, which is an inner city, mostly low demographic school, but I was always surrounded by different beliefs and different races and different ethnicities. So I don't really think the students, I'm sure I can speak for other schools in like the Oklahoma City Public School District, here in the inner city school district system, where diversity isn't really an issue, but the problem that a lot of students face is whenever we progress through the standard curriculum that the state imposes upon these school districts, there's little to no representation of Black and Indigenous and then people of color, like literature and culture and religion and all the ethnic backgrounds and stuff like that, rather than the standard, like obviously like MLK, Rosa Parks, stuff that is common knowledge. But it would really feel comfortable for me, and I'm sure I speak for other students, to see more stories of people who look like and act like I do.
Very good. That's really specific. Thank you. Kel.
Yes, I honestly do believe that systemic racism is still around in many different aspects in the education system. For one, I was born and partially raised in Clinton, Oklahoma, and I moved here in the second grade. And while I did experience a huge cultural shock, I did realize that there are limited opportunities to help advance people of color, maybe, or even Hispanic people who may speak Ebonics or, broken English, to where they can help advance their grammar or their communication skills. And then secondly, in the past student advisory meeting, we talked about, I put in the comment section, redlining, which is effect that I brought up happens even with Millwood Public Schools. After talking to their superintendent, she was telling me how a similar school district with 100 less students, they get about $1 million more in funding each year. So I think that is an effect that isn't necessarily guided by people who are in office today or, administrating us today, but it is something that was put in effect long ago, and it has not been taken care of yet.
So then you're describing changes that need to happen both in legislation or in public policy. Can you define redlining for all of those watching?
Yes, so I know little about it, but I watched the video before the last meeting, and it's about where basically there were a few neighborhoods within, across the nation, honestly, in different cities where they would redline the poor populations, and it would affect where they go to school, what loans they could get, and, just basically the type of life they were able to live. And that still goes in effect today. I say, even though we do not redline, I don't believe, places like Millwood are still getting that effect, or, feeling that effect. And it's going directly to the students. And, my school, Putnam City High School, we're going 1-on-1 in the high school this year with iPads. I don't see them getting that same opportunity, even though they have less students.
I see. Great. Really, we've had some really good comment. I want to come to some who've had their hands up for a while. I think Kayden.
Okay, so I have 3 points here, and the first one is about history. And, I'm a big history guy. I like studying history whenever I have the chance. And I think a great way we can improve people's mindsets and just the educational system in general is to show both sides of history. We can use Christopher Columbus, for example. We learned that he found the Americas and all that good stuff. But we don't learn about the bad stuff, or if we do, it's maybe a small 10-minute session about it. So I think if we really just open up our educational system to both sides on every subject, I think that would help improve because people's mindsets. The second would be once again proper funding for each district, no matter your demographic or anything like that. And then the third is just simple respect towards other people you might have disagreements with, and just people in general. Because nobody is born racist. It's something you either grow up with or have a mindset with. And we have to do our very best to help show people that, hey, simple respect is how you should go about things, no matter what it is.
Those are really good and speak to that. What do we do? Nicholas?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment off of what Shakeel and both Kayden said about the disproportionate inequality that actually does have to do with race, because a lot of the majority of low demographic families here in Oklahoma City, I'm not sure what the rest of the state looks like, but are people of color. And you can see that the opportunities for the students who attend low socioeconomic school districts are drastically different than what would be if I attended a well-funded, properly functioning school district. For example, like chemistry labs, you can go to a school that has adequate funding, which has like scientific experiments and all of the stuff that a student would need to develop that passion for chemistry, which would push them on through post-secondary education, a completely different career, versus a school who's underfunded and chemistry just looks like textbook and worksheets, who eventually would fall out of a passion which would otherwise develop. And I think that can apply to many different fields of interest in public schools, such as technology. Is depriving these students of a future, rather.
Thank you. And I know, Sean, you've had your hand up for a while.
So I attend Charles Page High School in Sand Springs, which is a suburb of Tulsa. We're just 15 or 20 minutes out. So this history of Tulsa with the race massacre of 1921 was a large part of the curriculum that we had growing up. Throughout the school system. We started it around freshman year in high school. So that's a conversation that we have, and I know a lot of the schools that surround Tulsa continue to have, because it still does affect the Greenwood district. There's a lot of rich history there. I think what all of us have been hitting, especially in every other area, is the opportunity for students to drive the conversation. And so I know my administration has done a really good job with that. We have a free period every week. So our classes get restructured a little bit. And so it builds an extra hour into our day. And during that hour, our administration and our teachers allow students to meet with different clubs and different activities. And any student-led club can meet during that hour as long as they have a teacher sponsor. And so what that's allowed our student body to do is to attend different group meetings and learn more from students. And I think that that's a really approachable way to start that conversation, as well as a very realistic approach, because whenever we're talking about things, there's obviously funding limitations. There's limitations as far as legislation and changing some of these things, curriculum, and those are all long-term projects to work towards. But this is a administration providing the opportunity for students to lead the conversation and educate one another is something that I think is pretty reasonable.
Oh, that's powerful too, to think of just the difference in your schedule that can foster that kind of opportunity to talk and connect and understand and be heard. That's really great. Okay, so Madison, I'm going to call on you. I want to tell everybody watching, we're going to stretch this just a little bit. We have a cushion before that next session starts. So I'm also going to ask our team to start looking at some of those questions and things put in the chat so we can also turn to answering some of the audience questions. Madison.
Thank you. So one thing that I noticed that I think we really need to be careful of is that I think it's sad that we have categorized and generalized teachers to be a part of systemic racism across Oklahoma, because we have such a caring and great group of teachers. And I think during generalizations, we all need to be very careful of who we accuse, because I think that must be on a district to district basis. And that's something I'm sure that is a problem in some areas. And that is a conversation that needs to be had, but we absolutely cannot characterize our teachers as that, because they have done a great job. And one more thing is, I think part of the problem is just starts with a heart and a service to others, which is something that I think our counselors did a really great job on teaching bullying and being kind whenever we were all in elementary school. And I think maybe that's a problem that can start with good counseling rather than public policies that just open up more venues for indoctrination, no matter what views you believe. So I think also the other part that I see is more of a problem is the difference between low income levels as far as disadvantages go. I mean, one of my friends, she had no time for sports, hardly had time to study because she had to work 30 to 40-hour work weeks just to keep up with all of the bills. And she's an inspiration to me. She made it with Oklahoma's Promise and is in college, and she's doing great. But I think that's something that's more of an issue in our school districts right now. And I also think that we do need to work on our history, because really most of it hasn't been portrayed in depth, which is hard, but we could offer some more history classes and more further education as far as that goes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mariah, real quick, and we'll start our first live question, but go ahead with your comments. You've had your hand up.
Okay, so I think what we're all basically coming to is education is the key. And I don't think it's necessarily, we're not trying to generalize teachers and say, that they're involved in systemic racism, but they really are, there are educators, and education is key. And so they're in a really prime position to be able to teach the things like having, a serving heart and an open mind and things of that nature. So I think, because, we all talked about we need to have those things, but a lot of us have probably maybe grown up with parents or someone who influenced us to be that way. And because, like, I think Kayden said it, nobody's born racist, nobody's born biased. You have to form those biases as you grow. And elementary teachers, especially high school teachers, they can be really influential on their students. And so education is the key to it. And I think that's just what we've all kind of come to the consensus of is, education needs to be involved in furthering that change.
Very good. Thank you for those. And that's a really great way to close out that piece, unless there's more that comes from our guests that are with us with live questions. Again, we're just going to stretch this just a few more minutes, but Steffi or Phil, do you have a question that you can bring to the panel from our guests that are following?
Well, yes, Superintendent, going back to an earlier topic, there were some questions about asking what the experience was with your respective districts and schools with Chromebooks, and if technology was provided and how that worked out this past spring and going forward.
Mariah? Did you have your hand up or?
Sorry, I couldn't get it unmuted. So my school, it's low social economic or whatever. We don't get a ton of funding. And so while we have Chromebooks in the school, it's kind of for all the classrooms to use. And so we couldn't just hand those out to students. So what I experienced coming from a small school in Southern Oklahoma is we didn't have technology. We don't have kids who have access to Wi-Fi. There's probably a small percentage of us that actually do. And so technology wasn't really an option that we had. So that's what I experienced with it. We didn't really get to have, we had group me's for my high school classes because all of us have cell phones. But especially for the elementary students, the disconnect was huge because they didn't have those technologies to keep them connected.
All right, and thank you, Payton.
Sorry, I was having trouble getting it unmuted. So my district has Chromebooks, and when we're in building and doing regular learning, we're able to check them out from the library on a classroom basis, so an entire set for a classroom. We're not financially at a point where we can be on a one-to-one basis. So what our school did was they checked out Chromebooks individually to students during distance learning who needed them, and worked with local internet providers to provide hotspots for those students because they can't use their Chromebook without internet, and many of them who didn't have access needed both. So they kind of battled that in that way, and most of us found it to be very beneficial, just from speaking to other peers and things of that nature.
And Payton, while you're still got the mic, would you share what you put in the small group chat of the panel about racism?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I typed in the chat was, I think one of the biggest ways we could begin to combat systematic racism is by having a willingness to learn and listen to those being negatively impacted or oppressed by systematic racism. I'm Native American, but I don't look it, and even then I would never fully understand or have to go through what people of color do. It's my responsibility to listen and learn, and the fight to end systematic racism begins with educating yourself that there's a problem. I think many of us would do well to remember that.
I can't think of a better way to say that. And it is such an inspiration to have that said from our students. I appreciate you so much. And then I think we're just going to go ahead and wrap up now. And I want you to give us that one thing that you would encourage teachers to do as they think about the next school year. I don't know if you can fashion your answer, Kayden, you've had your hand up, but I'm going to start with you. Looking forward, what do our teachers need to know?
I would say our teachers just need to be more open to teaching past what's in the curriculum, whether it be in history or any other subject, and to teach both sides of it. Really just open up the student's mindset and allow them to have multiple perspectives. And I really do think that would help improve many different subjects. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And Nick?
Well, I think everything we've discussed today has been very beneficial to educators in our state, but what I would like to see as like a final piece of advice, I guess, is to have a unified staff against whatever issue we're facing and not have any internal disagreements that could be confusing, especially for younger students. So, I mean, obviously we need to be very safe during the pandemic. If we're returning to school in person or hybrid model, whatever the case may be. And then when combating systemic racism, I think if the entire staff was unified against a common goal, it would be very beneficial and effective to eliminating these common problems.
Zeeler.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nick, and I totally agree with everything that was said before. I think that a good way that teachers can go forward from here on out is to make sure that, everyone is getting the support that they needed, because, when we do engage in virtual online learning, sometimes students may feel a little bit more like distanced, and maybe they keep their cameras off and mics muted the whole time, or maybe they don't join in on those meetings. So I just think that as we go into the next year, we should put, mental health and mental illnesses more on the top priority as we further into our next education.
Really, really key. Who else can close? A couple last comments. Perla, do you have something on your mind?
Yeah, I just think that teachers need to remember
and talk really. We have a hard time hearing you for some reason. So project if you can.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me, but I just want to remind teachers for the upcoming school year to remember how important it is to stay connected with students. I know I just graduated and I don't know where I would be at right now if it wasn't for my teachers being my mentor, for being my support system. And I just want teachers to realize how much of an impact
they make and how helpful they are. And so even though school may be virtual this year, I know that we did have a lack of communication this past semester, and I hope that they will stay connected individually with every student, which I know that's a lot to ask for with many students, but I know teachers will find a way to do that. So,
thank you, Jake.
Okay, you kind of got me on the spot there. I was just about to send you a message. I'd just like to remind everybody that I'm from Guyman High School in the Panhandle, and our teachers are doing an excellent job. Shout out to the Guyman School District and all of our administration. They're doing a great job in connecting to the students. Communication is top notch up here, and I think in order to address these issues, we need to have the relationships with the students. And if a professional development tip may be to look into capturing kids' hearts, that's something that our administration has adopted, and it's doing wonders in our district. There's a lot of stubborn teachers out there, not just in our school district, but across the nation. And capturing kids' hearts is, I've seen teachers start to break down their stubbornness and start to be loving and more kind to other students, and that helps cultivate a better relationship.
All right, and we are running out of time, and I can see 4 hands still up. So can you give one word of encouragement? What do teachers need to bring their students? And if you can make it one word, I'll ask Sean.
Final thing is just a large thank you. Just this year, just keep bringing the same intensity, keep bringing the same love for the students that you guys have, because throughout it all, it's not going unnoticed. We're seeing it, and thank you.
Thanks.
Just know how appreciated you are and how influential you are. It's easy to lose your passion for teaching in such times like this, but y'all really do make a difference, and y'all are the reason all of us are sitting here right now talking about these things so eloquently and so intelligently.
Madison?
Thank you so much for being fun and engaging, and try your best to see your students in person. It makes such a difference.
And the final word from Payton.
Support would be the word I would choose. Just don't forget to check in on your students. This is really trying times for all of us, and I have had teachers that do that, and I know personally Dr. Brown at the high school has saved multiple students just by checking in. So don't forget to do that.
Awesome. All right. Well, we could have talked for another 2 hours, and we were just getting started, but thanks so much to our fantastic set of panelists, and you inspire us. You are the reason we do what we do. I hope everybody has a great conference and a great day. Thanks so much, everybody.